They blamed her for everything. Until her ex's mother spoke up. I didn't even cry when he left. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. I thought I would. God knows I'd rehearsed every version of that moment in my mind. Me collapsing to the floor, mascara streaking down my cheeks, clutching at the hem of his shirt like some desperate movie wife. But when the door finally closed behind him, and the sound of his suitcase wheels scraping against the apartment's hallway tiles disappeared down the corridor, I just stood there. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized he hadn't just left me. He'd taken me with him. My reputation. My dignity. By the time I got to work that Monday, the rumors had already started. It began in whispers. Did you hear about Maya and Eric? Then it turned sharp. She lied to trap him. Said she was pregnant. And then vicious. Classic Maya. She's always been a little off, hasn't she? What no one said out loud, but everyone believed, was that I had tried to force Eric into marriage. That I'd fabricated a pregnancy. That when I was caught I went hysterical and started making threats. Eric of course said nothing. And his silence said everything. We had been together for 4 years. Lived together for 2. Engaged for 1. His family had never liked me. Especially his older sister, Viviane. She worked in finance, wore her contempt like Chanel perfume, and had once said to my face, "You're cute, Maya. But you don't build legacies with cute. You build them with pedigree." I was a social worker. I dealt with messy custody cases and broken homes for a living. And I loved it. But to Viviane, and eventually to Eric, it wasn't impressive. It was a liability. After the breakup, I tried to keep my head down. But Eric's family didn't just want distance. They wanted war. I lost my promotion at work when a complaint was anonymously filed questioning my professionalism. It accused me of threatening a parent during a custody consultation. It was ridiculous, easily disproved, but the damage was done. My reputation took a hit I couldn't afford. That same week, my landlord told me he'd decided not to renew my lease. The apartment technically belonged to Eric's uncle, though I'd been paying rent on time every month for 2 years. Suddenly, I was being asked to vacate. I knew what was happening. They were closing in on me like a pack of wolves. Quietly, legally, thoroughly. They wanted to erase me. Erase the embarrassment I'd caused. Erase the version of Eric that ever loved someone like me. And I almost let them. The only person who stayed by my side was Naomi, my best friend since college. She came over every night for a week after the breakup, made tea, listened to me replay conversations I couldn't let go of. I must have told her that same story a dozen times, the one from last November, when Eric had come home with a teddy bear tucked under his coat and a sparkle in his eye. "Is that for me or for a future niece?" I'd asked, teasing. "It's for us," he'd said gently. "When the time comes." I remember holding the bear and thinking, he's ready. I was wrong. What I didn't tell Naomi, not at first, was that I had been pregnant. For 8 weeks. It wasn't something I'd faked. It wasn't some emotional blackmail scheme. It had been real. Too real. And it was gone now. I'd miscarried alone in our bathroom, in the middle of a thunderstorm, 3 days before I ever had the chance to tell him. I hadn't even known for long. I was still planning how to break the news. Eric was stressed, distracted, buried in a new project at work. I wanted it to be special. Gentle. I wanted it to be right. Instead it was blood. And silence. And shame. The irony. I still didn't hate him. Not yet. Hurt, yes. Furious, absolutely. But part of me, some stupid, pathetic part, still thought he might reach out. Apologize. Ask if I was okay. But weeks passed. Then a month. Then another. And the only time I heard his name was when someone whispered it like poison, usually followed by some variation of, "Maya?" "Yeah." That's the one who tried to baby trap Eric. I was close to breaking when the letter arrived. It wasn't from Eric. It was from his mother. Thin envelope. Handwritten address. No return name. I stood in my kitchen for 10 minutes just staring at it, as if opening it might collapse the whole world. Finally I tore it open. Inside was a single page, folded neatly in 3. Mia, I would like to meet with you. Privately. No one else needs to know. I'll explain everything then. Helen. No apology. No explanation. Just a cold, deliberate invitation. I almost threw it out. But curiosity is a strange drug. And so is grief. So I showed up. Helen chose a quiet cafe on the edge of town. The kind of place where no one asked questions and the coffee came in chipped porcelain mugs. She was already there when I arrived. Her posture impossibly straight, her pearls gleaming against a navy cardigan. She didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just nodded toward the chair across from her. Maya. Helen. We sat in silence for a moment. I expected accusations. Condescension. A rehash of everything her daughter had said behind my back. Instead she asked, "Were you pregnant?" I didn't speak. She repeated softer this time. "Were you?" I looked down. Nodded once. "Did Eric know?" I shook my head. Helen's shoulders sagged, barely, but enough to show that something inside her cracked. Then she whispered, "You need to know the truth about my son." Helen didn't touch her coffee. It sat untouched between us as she spoke. Her voice the kind of steady you only develop after decades of learning to never shake in front of men. "My son," she said quietly, "has always been charming. It's his gift. And his curse." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. He learned early on how to give people what they wanted. Smiles, promises, yes. But it never lasted. As soon as he had what he wanted, he'd change. Grow cold. Withdraw. Then twist the story to make himself the victim. She looked at me sharply. "Does that sound familiar?" I nodded barely. He did it with his father too. Eric was 16 when his father left. And when people asked why, Eric always said, "He walked out on us." But that wasn't the full truth. I leaned in, unsure where this was going. "His father walked out," she said, "after Eric forged a loan in his name and cost us our home. He told the police he didn't know what he was doing. He cried in court. They believed him. I believed him. And when the dust settled, he told me he was glad, because he never wanted to live in a place that smelled poor anyway." My stomach turned. Helen sipped her coffee for the first time, then added, "I stayed quiet for years, even after the things he did to me, to his sister, to his friends. But what he did to you, this time I couldn't." Felt frozen, not just by what she said but by the fact that someone finally was validating what I had felt all along. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't unstable. I had been manipulated and discarded. "What did he tell you?" Yes. Helen glanced out the window. "He told us you were obsessive, that you faked the pregnancy, that you threatened him." Viviane was ready to press charges. I laughed, bitter and hollow. "But I didn't believe him," she continued, "because I saw you. I watched you hold your breath when he spoke. I saw how you looked at him like he was the center of your world. Women like that don't fake babies." That was the first crack in the dam. I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to believe me until that moment. But even so, I asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" Helen looked tired. "Because I've watched my son destroy every good thing in his life. And I never stopped him. I enabled it. I protected his image. But when Viviane said she was planning to leak confidential notes from your old cases to the press, I shot upright. She what? She said it would make sure Maya never works in this town again. I realized what we had become. What I had become. And for once, I had to do the right thing. It all made sense. Timing. The whispers. The perfectly orchestrated humiliation. But the worst part. The work. I had been hours away from signing a resignation letter. From packing up my apartment. From leaving the city for good. I want to help, Helen said, interrupting my thoughts. I want to make it right. I stared at her. You can't undo what's been done, I said quietly. No, she replied. But I can expose the lie. The opportunity came faster than I expected. 3 weeks later, I was contacted by CPS. A child custody case I'd closed 2 years ago was being reopened, and they needed the original social worker involved. Me almost said no. But something inside me, the part that still wanted to fight, said yes. That's when I found out who the case was about. Eric's cousin Ava was in the middle of a bitter custody dispute over her 3-year-old daughter, and Eric's family was pulling every string to win temporary guardianship. And the judge on the case, Helen's cousin. I showed up to the hearing ready to testify. I had my old reports, my notes, and my ethics intact. But what I didn't have was immunity from being cross-examined. Viviane showed up with an attorney, smug as ever. And just as I feared, she pulled out a folder of alleged misconduct reports against me, including the fabricated complaint that cost me my promotion. They were trying to discredit me. Publicly. The judge paused the hearing. Told everyone to reconvene the next morning for review of admissible evidence. As I packed my things, shaking, Helen approached me. Give me tonight, she said. Just trust me. I didn't want to. But I had nothing left to lose. That night, I sat in my tiny new apartment, replaying every choice I had made since the day I met Eric. I opened the drawer where I had hidden the ultrasound photo. Blurred, faint, only 6 weeks along. It was all I had left of that child. I hadn't told anyone. Not even Naomi. I held it against my chest and closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, cried. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Viviane walked in with that same look she always wore. The one that said I've already won. But then the door opened again. And Helen walked in. Not as a mother. Not as a supporter. But as a witness. Gasps spread across the room when her name was called. Eric wasn't present. He had refused to attend. Typical. But Viviane's smirk finally faltered. Helen took the stand and spoke clearly, without tremble or apology. She started with the complaint, the one that cost me my promotion. She explained how it had been filed using an anonymous burner email she traced back to a server connected to Viviane's office. Then she moved on to the pregnancy. She was pregnant, she said plainly. I know this because I saw the test in her bathroom. I was visiting to drop off a scarf for Eric. He had left it at my place. Maya didn't know I was there. She had left the test on the sink. She wasn't faking it. She didn't know I saw it. But I did. And I didn't say anything. Not until now. The room was silent. Dead silent. The judge leaned forward. You are stating under oath that the defendant's pregnancy was real? Yes, Helen replied. And I'm stating that my son lied. That my daughter lied. And that Maya is not the manipulator in this story. She looked at me then. I am. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing. The judge recessed the session immediately. Legal consequences were being discussed for both Eric and Viviane. And me. I stepped outside into the sun. For the first time in months. Could breathe. But that wasn't the end. Because as I walked down the steps of that courthouse, Naomi called me. She was sobbing. Maya, she said, you need to come to the hospital. It's about Eric. I hadn't heard Eric's name said with concern in months. So when Naomi called me crying from the hospital, those 4 words, it's about Eric, thudded in my chest like a dropped gavel. I don't understand, I stammered. What do you mean? What happened? I don't know everything yet, she said, her voice cracking. But he collapsed in his office. They brought him in unconscious. He's in critical condition. For a split second I felt nothing. Then guilt. Then rage. Then confusion. Then, without quite knowing why, I grabbed my coat and keys and drove to the hospital. I didn't ask why I went. Just went. By the time I got there, it was chaos. Eric had suffered a massive internal bleed. They suspected it was from a previously undetected gastrointestinal condition exacerbated by stress and alcohol. He was in surgery. Helen was there, sitting alone in the hallway, her face pale and drained. Viviane was nowhere in sight. I didn't ask why. I just sat beside Helen in silence. She didn't speak. Neither did I. And for 2 hours we waited. When the surgeon finally appeared, he looked grim. There were complications, he said gently. He's stable, but the damage was significant. He'll need to be monitored in the ICU for at least a few days. He's asking for family. Helen turned to me slowly. He asked for you, Maya. I almost refused. I wanted to scream at the absurdity of it. After everything he'd done, now he wanted me? But curiosity is a slow-burning fuse. And so is grief. So I walked into his room. Eric looked nothing like the man who'd left me. He was thinner, paler. Wires and IVs snaked across his arms and chest. Machines beeped and hummed softly, keeping rhythm with his breath. When he opened his eyes, they landed on me. And instead of arrogance, I saw something else. Fear, regret, shame. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said, his voice hoarse. I almost didn't. He nodded weakly. I deserved it, he whispered. I destroyed you. I didn't reply. He turned his head slightly, eyes watery. You were pregnant. It wasn't a question. It was an admission. Yes, I said. He closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. I found the photo, he rasped. The ultrasound. You hid it in the drawer in the hallway. After you left. He choked on his words. I'm sorry, Maya. I stood still. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched the man who once broke me crumble under his own collapse. Why? Finally asked. Because I was scared, he whispered. You were good. Oh, good. And I wasn't ready to be seen for what I really was. I thought if I got ahead of the story, painted you as the liar, I could stay the victim. He looked at me then, really looked. But it didn't work. You walked away with your soul. I walked away with nothing. There was nothing more to say. I left the room quietly. And I didn't look back. 6 months later. I didn't speak publicly. I didn't need to. Helen's testimony in court was enough to repair the damage to my name. The custody case I had helped with was ruled in favor of the mother, and I was invited back into my old role with a promotion and back pay. I declined the job. Instead, I took a role at a non-profit clinic for young mothers. One Friday afternoon, Naomi visited the office. She brought me lunch and news. Eric moved, she said. Pause. To where? Some rehab center in Maine. Supposedly trying to rebuild. I nodded once. It didn't sting anymore. It didn't burn. Just floated. I had let it go. Later that evening, after Naomi left, I locked my office, pulled out my phone and opened the photo. The ultrasound. It had faded slightly from being folded so many times, but I still knew what it was. Proof. Of what happened. Of what they tried to erase. Of what I survived. I placed it in a new frame and set it on my desk. Beneath it, I wrote one word. Remember. Because I wasn't defined by what they said. Or what he did. Or what I lost. I was defined by what I fought to keep. My truth. Name. My dignity. And now my future. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.